Hello, dear friends, partners, and distinguished guests. My name is Tal Schneider. I'm a political and diplomatic correspondent. Welcome to the Society for International Development Annual Conference in the memory of the late Dr. Yehuda Paz, the founder of SID Israel, mentor and professional authority for many who are engaged in international development and humanitarian aid. We are delighted to have with us some very esteemed guests from all over the world. This is a great opportunity to mention that all of SID Israel work is made possible thanks to the ongoing generous support of Pierce Foundation, and we are thrilled to greet the chairman, Sir Trevor Pierce, who is joining us here from London. Since we have a tight schedule, with many very interesting guests from around the world, I would like to welcome Mr. Alon Ber, Director of SID Israel, for the opening remarks.
Good afternoon from Tel Aviv. Good morning to those joining us from the United States and Latin America. Good afternoon to our guests from West Africa and Cairo. And good evening to our distinguished guest from Nepal. I am delighted to open the annual conference of the Society for International Development, SID Israel, for the first time, and I hope also the last time, in an online format. For those meeting us for the first time, allow me to share with you who we are. SID Israel is an umbrella organization encompassing over 150 civil society organizations, government agencies, private companies, and academic programs. All are involved in the field of humanitarian aid and international development. Our mission is to promote and encourage positive, responsible Israeli action in the developing world, actions that address global challenges and are carried out in collaboration with local partners. To say that the past year has been complicated would be an understatement. The world we knew has completely changed, and what we took as for granted a year ago has disappeared. Often when I'm asked what is international development, I answer that it is basically everything. There is almost no area in our lives that is not connected to the world of development. We always explain how important it is to provide holistic solution to global challenges. Broad approach, this is perhaps the main things that has vanished from our life in the past year. Large part of the world operating from a narrow perspective, dealing almost exclusively with one issue, the COVID-19 pandemic. The fact that the world is operating this way has pushed aside painful and significant issues such as hunger, medical research not related to COVID-19, public health issues, problem with access to clean water, and other crises. An additional 130 million people will fall into chronic hunger by the end of 2020, according to the United Nations. Studies published in important scientific journals estimate more deaths from malaria, and 73 countries have warned that their stock of antiviral HIV medication has been greatly reduced due to the pandemic, even to the point of running out. In addition to these reports, the world is facing and will face a global economic crisis. And we know that it will first and foremost hit the weakest and most vulnerable places, widening the gaps and intensifying the challenges. The global atmosphere, which did not spare Israel, is an enormous challenge for us and for everyone involved in international development. It has become even more complex and difficult to explain the importance of taking action in the developing world and addressing global challenges. But there is also a good news. After more than 2 years, recently, the Israeli government published for the first time a strategic plan for international development. The plan, which is the most comprehensive document ever presented by the Israeli government on this subject, corresponds with a strategic process we began 3 years ago, a process that eventually led to a government decision to consolidate this plan. So while it is true that there is a big difference between making plans, implementing them, and there is still a long way to go, the fact that even in this challenging time, Israel is taking such a step is encouraging. This is the perfect opportunity to thank those who have worked on non-stop on this program over the last few years, Ron Eifer and Anat Carmel from the Prime Minister Office. Because time is short, our schedule today is full, I would like to thank our partners in this conference, from the Ministry of Finance, Chief Economist Shira Greenberg and Eyal Meidan, our friends from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the new head of Mashav, Einat Schlein and Shuli, and from the Foreign Trade Administration, Oad Cohen and Noah Partuk, to Dr. Bruria Adini from the Tel Aviv University. A big thanks to those who are hosting us today, Janet at the Herzog Folks Neeman office. Thanks to Yovav Gavish from the World Bank and to the SID team, Dana and Maria. And finally, to the Pierce Foundation, to Sir Trevor Pierce and Dina Gidron for ongoing partnerships and support. I'm wishing us all an interesting afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Alon. We now turn to Mr. Yitzhak Cohen, Deputy Finance Minister, a member of the Knesset with the Shas Party as of 1996, one of the most senior MKs and member of the lobby of the Knesset Forum on the Middle East, and maybe the most moderate member in the right-wing coalition. Mr. Cohen, please go ahead.
ערב טוב לכולם, ערב טוב טל. וחנוכה שמח. יש לי את הכבוד להיות כאן היום לפתוח את הכנס השנתי של ארגון SID ישראל. אני שמח לראות כל כך הרבה משתתפים ישראלים באירוע הזה. בנוסף למר פריד בלאוג', סגן נשיא הבנק העולמי עבור המזרח התיכון בצפון אפריקה, מר פריד קומר גיאוולי, שר החוץ של נפאל, פרופסור רוברט דוסי, שר החוץ של טוגו, וגברת רבקה גרינספן, מזכ"לית המזכירות הכללית של מדינות איבור אמריקה. פיתוח בינלאומי הינו נושא חשוב בסדר היום הישראלי, ואני מודה לארגונים כמו SID שפועלים כדי לקדם את השיח והעיסוק בתחום בישראל, ואני גם מודה לך טל שניידר על ההנחיה של היום הנפלא הזה. מדינת ישראל שבעבר קיבלה סיוע מגופים בינלאומיים, הינה כעת שותפה גאה במאמץ העולמי לקידום מטרות לפיתוח בר קיימא בעולם המתפתח. כמדינה שעברה בעבר הוגדרה כמדינה מתפתחת, ישראל התמודדה עם אתגרים רבים שכלכלות מתפתחות מתמודדה איתם כיום, לדוגמה מחסור במים, קשיים בפיתוח תשתיות החקלאות ואי יציבות אזורית. מתוך הצורך להתמודד עם אתגרים אלה, צמחה הרוח היזמית שישראל ידועה בה כיום. אנו רואים את זאת כחובתנו לשתף את הידע והפתרונות שמצאנו עם העולם, כדי שאלה המתמודדים עם אותם אתגרים שאנו התמודדנו איתם בעבר, יוכלו ללמוד מניסיוננו ולהשתתף בהצלחה שלנו. לאור זאת, במשך השנים האחרונות, הקמנו שותפויות ויזמויות בתוך הממשלה ועם מוסדות הפיתוח, במטרה להעצים את תרומתה של ישראל בשדה זה בשנים האחרונות. ממשלת ישראל בנתה את האסטרטגיה של לפיתוח בינלאומי, אשר תנחה את צעדיה של ישראל בפועלה. אני מזמין אתכם, רבותיי ורבותיי, לקרוא את הטיוטה של האסטרטגיה הזו, אשר פורסמה באתר הממשלתי לתגובות הציבור. ולשתף מהתבוננות שלכם כמומחים בתחום, ישנה חשיבות לעבודה משותפת שלנו, כדי שנוכל להקים מיזמים אשר ימנפו את החדשנות הישראלית והידע הטכנולוגי שמשותפים למטרות טובות. מגפת הקורונה הביאה עמה אתגרים חדשים וכלכלות מפותחות ומתפתחות גם יחד. המגפה בחנה את גבולותיה של מערכות הבריאות ברחבי העולם, פגעה בתעשיות הקמעונאות השירותים והגבילה את יכולתנו לתקשר אחד עם השני באופן בו היינו רגילים לפני המגפה. התקדמנו לצעדי הענק להפוך לעולם מחובר באופן דיגיטלי. השינוי הזה רק התעצם בשנה האחרונה, כאשר אנשים, ממשלות ועסקים נאלצו לשנות את הדרך בה מתקשרים ולעבור לחלופה דיגיטלית. כאחת הכלכלות היותר מפותחות דיגיטלית בעולם, ישראל יכולה לתמוך במדינות מתפתחות בתהליך הדיגיטציה שלהם. המומחיות של ישראל בדיגיטציה של שירותי רפואה, פיננסים, שירותי ממשלה והבטחת סייבר, יכולים לסייע לכלכלות מתפתחות ברחבי העולם, להתמודד עם האתגרים שהמגפה הביאה עליהם, ולהתאים את עצמן להזדמנויות החדשות שהמגפה הביאה עליהם. זה משמח לראות את הכלכלות המתפתחות מתחילות להתמקד בדיגיטציה, ואנו מצפים לתמוך ולסייע בניסיונות הפיתוח שלהם בנושא. לצד ההזדמנויות שנוצרו עבור ישראל בתחום הדיגיטלי, חשוב גם להדגיש את ההזדמנויות שנוצרו עקב הסכמי השלום שנחתמו לאחרונה עם מדינות ערביות השכנות לישראל. משום שהאינטגרציה האזורית היא נדבך חשוב במאמצי הפיתוח. הסכמים אלה מזמנים הזדמנויות רבות לקידום פיתוח באזורנו, פרויקטים להגברת חיבור אזורים ולקידום הסחר. הינם בעלי אינטרס משותף, הן לכלכלות המתפתחות והמפותחות והן לכלכלות המתפתחות באזורנו. אנו כממשלה פועלים כדי לתמוך במאמצים האלה וניגשים בהזדמנויות ושותפויות אשר יפתחו בפנינו בזכות הסכמי הנורמליזציה. ישנה חשיבות למתן סיוע, לא רק לפיתוח המדינות הרחוקות מאיתנו גיאוגרפית, אלא גם לאלה הקרובות אלינו. אני נרגש לראות ישראלים רבים המשקיעים בתחום הפיתוח ומצפה לראות את תוצאותיה של העבודה המאומצת. אני רוצה להודות לכם על ההזדמנות לשאת דברים היום ולהודות למארגני האירוע, SID ישראל, על המאמצים הרבים לקדם ולתמוך את קהילת הפיתוח הבינלאומי בישראל. אני מאחל לכולם כנס מוצלח וחנוכה שמח, ותודה רבה, ובהזדמנות ברשותכם. ניגש להדליק את החנוכיה, נמצאים בצורה של חג החנוכה, חג מאוד מאוד מיוחד, שמסמל את ניצחון הרוח על הרשע, על הבערות. ברוך אתה, אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוות ציוונו, להדליק נר חנוכה. ברוך אתה, אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, שעשה ניסים לאבותינו, בימים ההם בזמן הזה. הנרות הללו אנו מדליקים, על הניסים ועל הפוקן ועל התשובות ועל המקום שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. זה כל כל שמונת ימי החנוכה, נרות עלינו קודש שם, ואין לנו שום להשתמש בהם לראותם בלבד, כדי להודות לשמך, ניסך לפרעותיך ולשמועותיך, מזמור שיר חנוכת הבית לדוד. חג שמח.
חג שמח. Thank you, Deputy Finance Minister, Mr. Cohen, and happy Hanukkah, Chag Sameach to you. I suppose you're in Jerusalem, and thank you for participating with us today. We'll turn to the program, and okay, so we'll turn to the program. We have an amazing and interesting topic and discussion with respect to humanitarian aid and development. We will hear from the foreign affairs ministers of Togo and Nepal, but before that, we will start with top leaders from the World Bank Group. Let me invite Mr. Farid Belhaj, Vice President for Middle East and North Africa of the World Bank Group, who is the World Bank Group Vice President and Middle East Director since 2018. Mr. Belhaj served 15 months as the Chief of Staff of the President of the World Bank Group and the World Bank Director for Middle East, in charge of its work in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Iran. He was based in Beirut, Lebanon, and also has a very intensive experience in Morocco. Mr. Belhaj, thank you for joining us. I appreciate your time. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for inviting me, and happy Hanukkah. And very good to see my good friend, the Vice Minister, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's great to see you. So you have a very interesting background in humanitarian development. Let's talk about the situation with the COVID, with the corona. What is the immediate and future consequences of the COVID-19, specifically in our region?
Okay, again, thank you very much. This crisis has come, obviously, at a time when the region had already a large number of challenges, very important to us. So this crisis has compounded these challenges. So we saw a dual shock here. In a large number of countries, particularly those who are oil exporters, there was the oil shock their revenues went down, and they found themselves in a very unforeseen situation in a way. And then you have also the other shock that is COVID. So we found as the World Bank ourselves in a situation where we needed to make sure that this crisis on the demand side and on the supply side would be mitigated as much as we could. So what did we do? We adopted I would say a three-pronged approach. One, obviously, on the health part of it. So we have moved very, very fast on putting on the table a number of financing to help countries move ahead with their health preparedness. We just in MENA, we delivered about $800 million just for countries to procure basic materials, testing materials, respirators, masks, etc. At the same time, we moved on social safety nets. It was very important to make sure that all of those people who fell into poverty would be maintained and sustained. So we engaged there with a number of projects, was in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Morocco, and other places. And the third point is the issue of small and medium enterprises. SMEs are the backbone of the economy in MENA. So what we did is make sure that during that time, we could put as much as we can. Let me just do something here. We could put as much as we can financing for those small and medium enterprises to manage their situation. So at the end of the COVID, they come out of it kind of on top, even though it is going to be very, very difficult.
Let's talk specifically about the role of the World Bank with respect to the, the distribution of the vaccines and also the prevention of the disease, the disease continuing to be in effect. How is the World Bank is going to be involved in the vaccination process, specifically in those Middle East countries?
Well, look, we are, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have already started with about $800 million in that. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of vaccination, we are trying to make sure that we will be able to serve as a bridge between a number of our countries, particularly those who are, poor countries, and those laboratories, those outfits who are producing these vaccines. It is going to be difficult. So what are we doing? On the upstream, we are working with a number of our countries to make sure that they have the logistical platform to be able to absorb these. So issues, for instance, of like cold chain is very important. Issues like training the people who will be, administering those vaccines. Issues that have to do with, outreach and preparing people to accept those vaccines. I know that in many countries, in Israel, as it is in a number of other countries, some people are skeptical. So we need to make sure that we advance that. So this is something that we are working on very, very seriously. We hope that between now and the end of the first quarter, we will be able to finally get those vaccines to a number of people, at least 20% of the population of each.
Another question I had in mind is with respect to the refugees in all of those countries, because obviously you're an expert on this issue, and delivering the vaccines in areas where the livelihood is not easy as it is before the disease. I suppose it's another big challenge if you look at the Syrian refugees that are in other areas in Lebanon, in Jordan, in probably also in Iraq. I suppose it should be an issue. So what can you tell us about, you just mentioned making sure that the countries has the platform to distribute the vaccines, but I'm also curious, how do you reach areas, remote and rural areas, in order to make sure, the entire country needs to make sure that the refugees area will not be sick again?
Yeah, look, in all of our financing, in Jordan, Lebanon, possibly other places where there are refugees, we are making sure that the refugees are included in whatever financing we do. So this is not new. This is going to be true for the vaccines, but it has been true before that. During the Syria crisis, when we had refugees going to Jordan and Lebanon, for us, the unit of account, if I may say, is the number of human beings on a territory, not necessarily their passport number or where they are coming from. So it is very important for us that those refugees are part and parcel of the whole conversation we are having with our countries. Again, on vaccines, but also on social safety nets, but also on any other type of engagement, for instance, education and health.
Are you making any plans in the World Bank for the following year, not just 2021, but looking ahead with finance and financial help? You just mentioned, businesses, small businesses, medium businesses. Are you making any plans ahead with respect to that flow of money that will be needed to pick up the economy in those areas?
Yes, absolutely. Look, we have, of course, plans for each one of the countries in which we are working. We have a pipeline for all of these countries. And this is not just for 2021, it's 21, 22, and beyond that. You know that you mentioned Morocco earlier. In October 2022, we will have the annual meetings of the World Bank and the IMF in Marrakesh, in Morocco. And we are planning a large number of events, engagement, and obviously projects and financing with that horizon, that Marrakesh horizon in front of us. Now, I cannot tell you how much money will go, not because I don't know what our capacity is, but it's basically because the region is so fluid that we really don't know today whether we have enough of a platform for countries like Lebanon, like Iraq, like Jordan, and other places where we are moving ahead with some of our projects. For now, again, talking about Morocco, since you mentioned it, and since it is in the news when it comes to Israel these days, we see Morocco as the brightest spot in the whole MENA today, because this country has been doing a great job in terms of developing its economy, diversifying its economy, and opening it up to the rest of the world. So for us, Morocco is really a very good example of how things should go. Nothing is perfect, and they still have some issues, particularly related to the social dimension of their development, but we see Morocco as one of the brightest spot in MENA.
That's amazing. You probably know that we are now following closely whatever is happening in Morocco. Every twist and turn is of interest here. So I thank you so much. I understand that you have a very busy schedule. I'm saying to the audience that Mr. Belhaj will leave us because of his prior engagement in other issues. So thank you so much for taking the time talking to us.
I thank you very much for inviting me and hope to see you soon in Jerusalem. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right, we now turn to Mrs. Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General, Ibero-American General Secretary. Mrs. Greenspan is the Deputy Secretary General, the Deputy General Secretary of the United Nations Associate of Administration of the United Nations Development Program. Is Mr. Greenspan online already? Hello, it's so good to see you.
So good to see you, Tal. Thank you so much.
We are very happy. We are running an international event here, and it's good to see that we can connect to people from all around the world at different times of the day. Mrs. Greenspan, you are an economist, and you are into a very crucial and dire time everywhere around the world, but we want to talk to you about the Latin America area and about the immediate and future consequences of on the Ibero-American countries that have been suffering badly from COVID-19. So let's hear from you with respect to international development and cooperation in your region.
Thank you so much, Tal. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. And Hanukkah Sameach, Lekulam.
Thank you.
Let me first explain what is the Ibero-American Secretariat, because probably many of you don't know, but we gather 22 countries, all the countries that speak Spanish and Portuguese from Latin America and Europe. And in Europe, so is the 19 Latin American and Caribbean countries and 3 European countries, that is Spain, Portugal, and Andorra. And so the question that you are asking me, Tali, is very, very important, because Latin America has been disproportionately hit by COVID-19. And we can talk about why, but one number is very telling, that Latin America right now, from every 3 deaths in the world, 1 is Latin America.
Wow.
1 is from Latin America. But we are only 8% of the world population. So we are 4 times hit in terms of the COVID-19 with respect to our proportional contribution to the world. And this is why, because in a way, COVID-19 interacts with our structural deficits of the past. So in the same way, COVID-19 interacts with your bodies because of your health preconditions, it happens the same in the social and economic sphere, that COVID-19 interacts with our problems that were not solved before. So we say, in a way of analogy, that we had diabetes from informality in our labor markets. We had asthma from our problems of inequality and poverty, that we had low productivity and low social security for our people. So in a way, that the impact of COVID-19 has made it worse and amplified the impact of COVID-19 in our population. And so just to give you a picture, in the 1st of January 2021, every Latin American will wake up being having an economy that is 8 or 9% smaller than it was before. Our GDP per capita will be the same as we had in 2010. So we are going back 10 years.
Yeah.
Our poverty will be equal to the one we had in 2005, 15 years back. And our extreme poverty data tells us that we will be with the numbers that Latin America had in 1990, 30 years of retrocess in terms of our extreme poverty numbers. So that is the reality that we will face the 1st of January 2021, and it's a very hard reality to face, and the challenges connected to those are not only socioeconomic, but also political for the countries.
So in order to put the economy back in your region, you have to be vaccinated, I suppose, and also you have to use civil society and governmental agencies in order to have the vaccine flowing, and also some assistance, some financial assistance. Where do you stand right now with the vaccinations? Are you getting, we saw the United States and Britain starting with the process. I can tell you here in Israel it's going to start next week. Where do you stand right now? Are you getting assistance on that front?
Well, the first thing to say is, at the global level, the vaccines are going in its majority in the first round to the developed world, not to the developing world. And that's a reality. So many of the countries of Latin America has already made the arrangements to start vaccination very soon. And there is a range of vaccines. So we have, we are waiting a lot for the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine because there is an agreement between Mexico and Argentina with AstraZeneca and private laboratories to produce the vaccine in Latin America. That will be very important because it's also a cheap vaccine and easier to handle. So that will be a very important step forward. The countries have made different arrangements with respect to Pfizer, to Moderna, to the Chinese vaccine, etc. But the problem is how quickly we can get the vaccines to really vaccinate our people. And probably there will be delays in terms of what the developed world will be able to do. We are very hopeful that the international community, through the multilateral system, the World Health Organization, with respect in the group of COVAX, will be able to make the vaccines available quickly to the developing world. But we know right now that it will be in a slower pace than the developed world.
So what is the role of your organization, I mean, in helping, assisting with money and with the platform to help get the vaccinated distributed, and also with the financial help for businesses in those countries?
Okay, two things with respect to that. One is that one of the things that my organization has been doing very strongly is to put together all the medical authorities that are the ones that will have to evaluate and give the go ahead for the vaccines to be able to start in our country. So we were able to put very quickly a network of all the authorities that will have to agree and that do regulate and norm and give the norms for the vaccines to be accepted in our countries, and for that to happen very quickly. Because if not, then vaccination cannot start. And every country has its own rules, but we try to converge the rules so all the normative framework for the vaccination to start takes place. And also all the distribution problems in terms of customs and availability within the countries. So that is a very important point. But the second point, Tal, I want to stress that Latin America, like many developing countries, will not be able to get out of this crisis without the help of the international community.
Right.
And right now, we know that the measures that were taken at the international financial system in 2008 were quicker and stronger than the ones we are seeing in this crisis. And this is true with respect to the capitalization and capital endowment of the development banks. We need to strengthen the development banks of the region, but also in terms of the special drawing rights in the IMF that were enabled in a new emission in 2008, and that has not happened.
So you say it has to be. You say it has to be stronger and faster than it is right now.
Absolutely. According to the UN, you need $2.5 trillion in cooperation and financial assistance for the world, and right now the IMF has less than one. So a new emission of special drawing rights is fundamental for the developing world right now to have access to flexible and money to be able to face the very constrained fiscal space that most of our countries have.
And it's probably in the interest of the entire international community, because it's a shared interest, because people will be traveling from your region to the United States, and they will bring on, the disease if it will not be taken care of. So It has to be done.
But also in terms of development, we will have to make very important investments. And most of our countries don't have the fiscal space to do it with our own resources. It's not the same to be in Europe and to have the European Development Bank. It's not the same to be in the US and have the Federal Reserve that has had an emission of $2 trillion only for the United States. Yes. Okay. So our countries in the development world will need different instruments, and we need the international community to really step forward.
Okay, we only have a very little time left. One last question. What about the development relationship with Israel? Do you have anything that is, that are you using, or you're using Israeli technology or Israeli resource in a way?
Well, I think that Israel can play a very important role in Latin America, because what we need is to change our development paradigm, and we need science and technology. That's what we need. We need knowledge. We need much more interchange in terms of the universities, the scientific community, and Israel can play a very strong role also in terms of our startups. Okay. We need innovation, and Israel can be a very important model for that.
So, Mrs. Greenspan, thank you so much for your morning, our afternoon here, and it was a pleasure talking to you, and good luck with the vaccination and everything. Thank you
so much, Tal.
Thank you.
A pleasure to be here. Toda rabah.
Okay, we are now continuing with the next panel, a panel of the foreign ministries from Nepal and Togo. I will present them shortly. I just want to present my guest here at the table. With me here is Mrs. Einat Schlein from the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Chief Director of Mashav. It's the Israel International Aid Agency. Also, Einat was Israel's ambassador to Jordan, and many other roles she took in the Israel Foreign Ministry for many, many years. And I would like also to welcome the Honorable Mr. Pardeep Kumar Gawili, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Federal Democratic Republic of Nepal. Is serving in his role as Foreign Affairs Minister for years now. Prior to that, he was in the Constitutional Assembly and also a member of the House of Representatives and Minister of Culture, Tourism, and Civil Aviation. Thank you so much for joining us. In a few short minutes later on, we will also have the Foreign Affairs Minister of Togo. I will present him shortly after we finish the discussion with Mr. Gawili. So maybe you can tell us, Mr. Gawili, thank you for being here with us. Maybe you can tell us about the immediate and consequences of COVID-19 in your area, in South Asia, but also in your country, Nepal in particular.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the Society for International Development, Israel, for kind invitation to be the part of this very important event, theming the changing face of the development cooperation and humanitarian aid amid COVID-19. I found the theme extremely relevant and timely. Before I would like to share the COVID pandemic situation in the region and in our country, let me greet our Israeli friends with whom we are celebrating the 60th anniversary of our diplomatic relation. We were supposed the high-level exchange of visits throughout the years, but due to the COVID pandemic, those visits, meetings were suspended, however, postponed. However, we hope that in the days ahead, we'll be able to meet physically. Nepal was the first country in South Asia to recognize the state of Israel So we fondly cherish our friendly relation with Israel, and we hope that our relation will elevate it in a new heights in the days ahead. Having said that, let me briefly update or share the latest situation of the COVID-19 in our country and in the region. I didn't say the global pandemic has affected everyone and everywhere with its unprecedented scope and speed. More than 73 million people infected, more than 1.6 million lives have lost, and almost all nation economies and communities have been affected. Asia is about 50,000 new cases daily. More than 2/3 are from the South Asia. So it is in a critical situation still. Though intensity is not similar in South Asia and Central Asia, it is more acute. In Southeast Asia, countries has been able to contain. For Nepal, now we have 250,000 cases diagnosed. But the fatality rate is comparatively low, just 0.6%. Now we have 1,600 plus lives lost, and government of Nepal is trying its best to contain this pandemic. Our priority is to save the lives of the people from the pandemic and save the livelihoods from the negative impact of the COVID-19. And for it, we have introduced major initiatives for economic recovery and to the containment of the COVID-19 in society.
I have with me Mrs. Ambassador Schlein, and we want to talk together about the cooperation of international aid and help for development countries and bilateral cooperation. So how do you see the cooperation with countries such as Nepal or other countries South Asia? And maybe if you want to ask the Foreign Affairs Minister a question, that's also can be directed.
Well, thank you, Tal, and good evening, I should say, to Nepal, Honorable Minister. COVID-19 has definitely transformed our world in many, many ways, and it also transformed the way that we work, the way that we think. I think that one of the first facts is the fact that we lost access to each other. No flights, fear of pandemic, and so on and so forth, which actually creates barriers and borders, which is the opposite of what we try as diplomats, what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to link people and bridge them. So as Mashav, who's been engaged in international development already since 1958, we had to work really fast, and this is what we've done. I think the key words here would be adapting and transforming. We had to think on our feet. We had to be really creative, and we've done many things in many countries, including in Nepal, but in many countries around the world. We had to transform everything that we do. Mashav is all about capacity building. It's all about investing in the human resource and offering Israel's expertise. We may lack the magnitude of budgets that other aid agencies have, but we're privileged with expertise and with a lot in this regard. So we had to move all of our efforts online on the one hand, and immediately once the pandemic broke, we started shifting all of our work and concentrating on assisting other countries to fight the pandemic. And this is what we've done, and I'm happy to talk some more about it. But I'm wondering if I can ask you, sir, I know that there were many things that happened in Nepal in this regard. We've had Nepalese students who stayed in Israel and continued their agricultural education here during the pandemic. Some of them have changed recently. We've had some assistance projects in Nepal. I'm wondering if how this was accepted in Nepal.
Thank you, Ambassador. That is really very, very interesting topics. Nepal is grateful to its neighbors and other multilateral donors and development partners who are quite generous enough to this tough time. Multilateral institutions like World Bank, IMF, Asian Development Bank, and the neighboring countries, India, China, and major development partners, US, UK, and other countries are continuously supporting in our fight against COVID-19. And especially I would like to thank Israel and Masab, which is doing a wonderful job for Nepalese people as well. You just mentioned about the Nepali youths which are working in Israel under the scheme of earn and learn, learn and earn. The skill transfer, skill learning and transfer has very, very effective for our country. Many returnees who come with the new technologies and knowledge, they have started their own businesses in their villages and townships. And I fondly recall my meeting with the then Masaf head in Kathmandu, who was visiting Nepal last year. And during that time, we agreed to establish the 7 provincial center of excellence in agriculture sector. And now we have already finalized the MOU and protocol in that regard, and we hope that very soon those center of excellence will start, and it will be very, very effective for the technology transfer, which the Israel have the expertise. Similarly, the other people who are working in Israel, they are very happy for the working environment there, especially the caregivers and other. So we hope that such partnership, and especially the technology transfer, advanced technology transfer for Nepal's agriculture and the SMEs will be very, very beneficial to the Nepali people, and especially in the context of our drive to the economic recovery after due to the caused by this COVID pandemic.
So, Mr. Foreign Affairs Minister, as we enter, we all know that we are entering a global crisis period. We don't know how many years it's going to take, but definitely we have some difficult years ahead of us. And, talking with Ambassador Schlein, I suppose some countries are looking for, international assistance, not specifically from Israel, but from the IMF, as we heard before, from international organization. How do you see your country and maybe the region looking for development cooperation in the coming years? What is your expectations?
Actually, prior to this pandemic, Nepal was in the road of rapid economic transformation and one of the fastest growing economy in South Asia. We were second after Bangladesh. We achieved almost around 7.1% growth in 3 consecutive years. So we were quite encouraged, and we have already made the commitment that we will be graduated from the least developed status at earliest, and will become middle income country by 2030, achieving all SDG goals. But this pandemic has affected severely, especially 3-4 areas have been more affected hardest. one of the major affected area is tourism. You know, Nepal's income, one of the major source of the income is tourism.
Ambassador Schlein, would you comment on what the Foreign Affairs Minister just said, and how do you see, future years with respect to international development?
Well, as I said before, I believe the key word is adapting. We have to adapt. And I want to share with you some of the things that we've done in the recent month. Mashav, which trained over 300,000 people throughout the years, normally in Israel or through instructors that would travel to a different country, had to reinvent itself. So we've had hundreds and hundreds of virtual webinars, transferring knowledge and expertise online. We also
agricultural knowledge online,
but it's not just agriculture. I'll tell you a little story about agriculture in a sec. But whether we speak of agriculture, innovation, education, in any field, speaking of psychological aspects of the pandemic and so on, we've convened virtual tables, bringing in seniors from Israel and from other countries, trying to share experience, exchange views and expertise. I thought that was really useful. We also moved, and again, even with agriculture, to virtual courses. And one of
Would
the
you say
nicest...
the countries?
Yes, in various countries, for example. I see that the minister is back. I'll just complete this story. And I'll tell you that President Rivlin visited the Pacific Islands last year, and we promised to build them model farms and talk to them and share expertise regarding agriculture. Now, unfortunately, no one can travel, and some of these countries actually are not affected by the pandemic, so they don't really want guests, but they do want our expertise. So Mashav's Agricultural Center has been instructing them online on a weekly basis. In my mind, they take the laptops and go with it to the fields where all the work is inspected and they get new instruction and problem solving. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, Mr. Foreign Minister, you were cut off just about the tourism. We heard from you that you are expecting maybe a change in the future with respect to the tourism business. Maybe you can give us a closing argument because we have to move on to other speakers, but I just want you to finish off what you just started to say.
Sure. So we want broader international cooperation and collaboration to have the economic recovery. First and foremost, the universal coverage of vaccine is extremely important because until and unless every people can receive the vaccine, world cannot be immune for the pandemic. So COVID vaccines should be dealt as global public goods. It should not be dealt as means for pile of the profits. So we need global cooperation for the availability and access to the vaccines, and the global cooperation for the economic recovery, especially for the exploring the new jobs, resuming the tourism, and transforming the new technology so that world can achieve the SDG goals by 2030, despite of this severe setback. If we can develop a synergy between the developing and developed country, then we can overcome these gaps. So international cooperation is extremely important in this regard.
Okay. Thank you so much, Foreign Affairs Minister Gaiwali, for taking the evening of your time and talking to our, in our conference. And hope to meet in Nepal as a tourist. We are now going to proceed with the program. And I will turn now to West Africa. And I am going to speak in a minute with the Foreign Affairs Minister of Togo, Professor Robert Dussey. Dussey, I'm sorry. Professor Robert Dussey, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation in African Integration of the Togolese Republic. Mr. Dussey, do we have him online already? Let's hope for that, because we want to hear from Western Africa about the way they are cooperating with the, dealing with the pandemic and with COVID-19. Okay, should I, maybe we should continue and talk. You were just mentioning online courses of agriculture. What other topics and what countries are you doing that?
Oh, we've been doing this all over the world. The beauty, we should look for some ray of sunshine in this whole horrible ordeal, right? Mm-hmm. So even if we miss the real human touch and the cultural exchange and everything that comes with a physical course, what we have now is actually through these virtual courses, we actually found that other countries that have no relations with us suddenly have access to Israel. And we had participants from places such as Pakistan, not to mention the Arab world,
wow.
Thinking of the Maldives and Indonesia and Comoro Islands in Africa and all sorts of countries with which we have no relations, and they showed up online. So maybe that is something that we're going to keep even once the pandemic is finally over. But I see the minister.
Yes. Hello, Professor Ducey. I'm very happy to see you online with us. It's a pleasure for us that you are joining us today. Maybe you can tell us a bit from your perspective in Western Africa. How do you deal with the COVID at the moment? We know the international effort for vaccination has just begun, but I'm not sure if it's have reached Africa yet, or Western Africa yet. Please.
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, I would like to express you my gratitude for inviting me for this session, particularly to our friend Ambassador Eina Shelen, the head of Mashab, for this invitation. The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly affected all countries in the world. So, but in the consequences have on a different scale, depending on the region of countries concerned. In our region is the West African region. I don't know if you know very well Africa. Africa is 54 countries, so we have 5 regions. West African region, we are 15 countries in our region, and the consequence is very serious for us. First of all, it's not the humanitarian consequence, because the situation is under control in our region. For example, in Togo, we have more than 3,216 cases right now, and only 66 deaths. Mm-hmm. So the situation is under control. But our problem is the economic problem. Is economic consequences very difficult for us. We have in our region the African, we say the small organization. The name is African Economic and Monetary Union, and we have the country like Mali, Niger, Senegal, Togo, Benin, and the indication is the economic indication is going down right now. So we say the consequence is an economic consequence. If we need to cause this situation, we have to work with all international organizations. Of course, we are working right now with IMF, with World Bank, and the assistance of the organization like Mashab is very important for us in our region. So concerning my country Togo, right now we have I can share with you some indication. So the number of employees in retail in leisure species has fallen, by 30%, and workplace attendance. So attendance in down, 12% from pre-pandemic levels. So the small and medium enterprise have been particularly affected. There are 41% in the agriculture and agro-industrial sector to have recorded a decline in the sales of the order of 17.5 to 100%.
Ambassador Schlein, would you like to refer a question or jump into the discussion with Professor Doucet?
Of course, it's great to see you, sir, and thank you for joining us. I want to talk about something that we found during the pandemic. We tried to reinvent ourselves, we tried to build on the existing infrastructure. And as Mashav has hundreds and thousands of graduates in various places, let me tell you about things we've done in West Africa. In West Africa, we had many courses targeting innovation. And as it was really hard to transfer any assistance in the beginning, we built on this infrastructure in order to support assistance. How? We first engaged with a group of very skillful young students that were a part of our innovation trainings in Senegal, and we provided them with a data file to print protective gear for hospitals in 3D printers. And we had to identify these young people that already worked with us. They had the printer, we gave them the file, and then we started printing them, providing basically just the raw material price. Then we engaged with other organizations. We engaged in Senegal and in Cameroon with UNICEF, with, for example, or with other embassies. And we started printing these masks. I'm happy to tell you that in the last 6 months, we've printed hundreds of thousands of these masks. We provided them in Senegal, in Cameroon, in Ethiopia, in Ghana, in Angola, in South Africa, in many places. In Nigeria, we had over 100,000 only then. And this is a nice way of combining the existing infrastructure and the wish of people to get engaged in things that help themselves. This is not about patronizing. This is about working together, us and you together, in order to better this world.
Professor Doucet, what is your expectations for your country, for Togo, with respect to international aid? Maybe you can talk a little bit about the vaccination distribution, because we don't know what the situation in Western Africa at the moment with the vaccine has just started, so it's probably not there yet.
What we are expecting is simple. We need to continue to work for everyone in our region and in Africa. For example, about the vaccine. Right now, when we are talking about the vaccine, it's like just the discussion between European people, maybe between American people, not with African people. Fortunately, we have right now we have a COVAX. COVAX is one of the is a structure what we can use to have a vaccine. So, our expertise, we think maybe around in 3 or 6 months we can have a vaccine in Africa. So it's a little bit late for us because, for example, our friend in US, they started yesterday or before yesterday, and in Europe maybe in the next week. So in Africa, unfortunately, in 3 months or in 6 months. So we are optimistic. We think by COVAX, we can have a vaccine in our continent in 6 months.
And the expectation with respect to financial assistance from the world, businesses, and help the flow of money and goods.
We don't need direct financial assistance. We're talking right now with World Bank and IMF because we say our problem is all the African countries is a debt issue. So fortunately, we have a chance during the last summit of G20, they decided to suspend the debt for 1 year, 6 months, 1 year. So it's a good, it's a good perspective for us because all we can move, we can work and push IMF and World Bank to let us to deal directly with, to buy the vaccine for our population. So the assistance is what we need, is the disponibility of the vaccine for us, not directly some money, because for money, our debt is what you know yourself.
All right, Foreign Affairs Minister of Togo, Professor Dusay, I thank you so much for being with us. It was very interesting to hear you, and take care.
Thank you.
Before we continue with our next panel, Ambassador Schlein, you wanted to make another remark?
Yes, I'm very glad to be here today, and I was happy to hear from our other guests. One thing is important. We could only have viable sustainability if we all work together. And this kind of conference is exactly the place to speak about this. If we all cooperate, governments, NGOs, and the public, we can get over the pandemic and go to a different future. So thank you so much.
Thank you for being here with us. It was a pleasure. Our next panel will be dedicated to the day-to-day challenges on the ground and experience. We will discuss the UN food program, then we will move on to Nigeria, and then to the founding partner of Ignite Power. We shall try to learn how the COVID has changed the work of those people on the ground, what adjustments were needed to do and how they were done, and we'll take some lessons from them. So let me just present our panelists. Mrs. Kate Newton, the Deputy Regional Director of the UN World Food Program. Mr. If Adebayo, Special Assistant to Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Office of the Vice President in the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And Mrs. Angela Homsey, co-founder and investor in Ignite Power. Do we have all of them online with me? I can only see Mr. Adebayo. Do I have your name correct? Adebayo?
Yes, Adebayo, yes.
Adebayo, feel free to correct me. Adebayo. All right. Since I see you already, and I do not see Mrs. Newton and Mrs.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you not see us or hear us?
They're all online? All right.
I'm here too.
So let's begin with Mrs. Newton from the UN World Food Program. Maybe you can tell us a bit about your work, your activities, and how the COVID-19 affected your day-to-day, operation.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much for inviting us to talk today. I'm as you said, the Deputy Regional Director of the World Food Programme, and at the moment we cover 16 countries across the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Central Asia. And At the moment, we estimate there's around 54 million people across our portfolio who are hungry or in need of some form of food assistance. And just to put this into context, conflict and economic crisis this year have obviously been the main drivers of hunger, but COVID's added a lot of strain to the hungriest of the hungry poor. And just looking at why that's happened, I think we're probably all quite familiar with the decreased market function and the fact that there's been decreased commodity movement as a result of that. Cross-border trade's been affected, and therefore that livelihoods have been affected. So the kind of, particularly for people who are working in the informal sector, this means that there's been less income coming into houses, that household purchasing power has been reduced, and that food access generally has been reduced for many of the most vulnerable people across the region. So our work has really been ramped up, meaning that many governments have stepped forward and asked us if we could increase our food assistance programs. And that doesn't always mean just handing out food. Sometimes that's also giving people cash transfers or helping to strengthen the social protection systems of governments and helping them to make sure that basic service provision is in place. We also run large school feeding programs across the region where we help governments to give food to children. And even where schools have closed, we've continued to try to adapt by, for example, giving children take-home rations, or for some children where they come from the poorest families, giving cash to their families, to encourage them to keep going with online schooling and to try to make sure that children are still getting that essential nutritious snack to help them to keep learning. And just in terms of the kind of work that WFP does as well, we're also a global logistics provider. So we help to provide a humanitarian air service to move humanitarian personnel and supplies around the region during the COVID pandemic. And at the moment, although we have food in our title, we're looking at how we can help with vaccines and how we can help to ensure that, for example, the cold chain that's used to move vaccines around the world is going to be available, particularly for countries where they might have real difficulty getting the vaccines out to certain areas of the country.
So, Mrs. Newton, before I go to your colleagues, I want to ask you this question. How do you reach the people that are unreached or are, in rural areas and people that are unregistered or, they don't have access to your services or they're unaware of your services? I mean, I suppose the big challenge is to reach those people who are really in a need and that are not, in the closed circles and don't know how to get and how to be helped. How do you reach them?
I think there's two answers to that question. One is that our expertise is really working in rural areas, and we're there at the request of the governments and local authorities. So usually they help us to get access to the most remote areas, and we have a whole range of different ways we do that, which is using normal access where that's possible, and then using more extreme forms of access when, if not, where we move food and people down rivers or across very rough territory using a whole range of different means, sometimes using local community associations to help with the last mile of delivery. I think the interesting thing about the COVID pandemic is that it's really calling us to question how we respond in urban areas as well, which hasn't really been traditionally our thing, because we've generally been working more with rural communities and with very poor farming populations, and now we're looking at urban contexts as well.
All right. I'll turn now to Mr. Adebayo, and you are a special advisor in innovation for the Nigeria government. Can you tell us a bit about your handling and day-to-day on-the-ground operation or innovative things that you had to do in order to tackle the great pandemic?
Thank you very much. So the pandemic came at a very critical time for Nigeria. Like you're aware, Nigeria is a country that gets a lot of its revenue from the sale of crude oil. And so when there was the downturn, the drop in the prices of crude oil in 2016, thereabouts, 2015, 2016, we went into a recession. And so in that period, we had to come up with a lot of programs and projects that enabled us to come out of recession. And then this pandemic came just as we were getting out of recession. So we had to go back to the drawing board and have a rethink. So we had different approaches. One was on the medical side. How we had to quickly ramp up the capacity of the NCDC, the Disease Control Agency, and enable them to be able to build labs. And now we have more than 60 labs in the country that are able to test for COVID-19. But also on the economic side, we had to set up, the president set up the Economic Sustainability Committee, which was chaired by His Excellency the Vice President. And the responsibility of that committee was to come up with proposals that could help the country to manage the economy in this period. And so what the committee did was to look at the key issues, the key economic factors that we could immediately tackle. And so we looked at sectors such as agriculture, because in Nigeria, agriculture, the GDP of Nigeria in 2019, agriculture contributed about 22% to the GDP. So we had to look at how we can support agriculture. We had to look at how we can support young people. And then we also had to look at the digital economy, how we can basically maximize this time to support people who want to work from home, to support startups who want to build new digital tools. And so we had to basically come up with all these programs, and also housing, because we realized that one of the sectors that can employ lots of people is housing, because then you're employing masons, you're employing carpenters, you're employing bricklayers, you're also supporting the cement industry, the architectural industry, and all of that. So housing was also one of the key things we looked at, and we came up with a program to build 300,000 new housing units within the next 3 years. And so these are things that we knew we're going to pump funds directly into the economy. But we then also had to look at the humanitarian and the social part of things and say, how do we support those who don't have anything, those who don't have an option? So we had to ramp up the government social investment program, which was already ongoing, which involves a cash transfer program. The cash transfer program involves giving 10,000 naira, which is about, in dollars, that would be about $1,000 is so I'll do the calculation. So about 10,000 naira monthly to families who are totally unable to get anything at the moment. So what we did was to ramp up those numbers from 1 million families to 2 million families. So what you find is that a lot of them are also then able to do a lot more. And how did we reach them? Because I know you asked the question about reach earlier. So we ran this via a World Bank program, where the World Bank uses certain indices to identify the poorest in the poor communities. So we already have data on the poor communities, but we're also then able to use community-based and community-based targeting to access the poorest within those communities and put them on a social register. So we're able to get the biometrics, we're able to get everything that ensures that we're able to limit corruption within that system and get the funds directly to them.
We heard from Mrs. Newton, and now I hear it from you as well, with respect to cash distribution. And I'm just wondering, many countries around the world, took to this route of just giving cash to people. But we found out that, many people, specifically maybe poor people, they get the cash and they don't want to put it back into the economy in order to get businesses moving, but they rather save the money for another rainy day. Do you think also in your country, the cash distribution, was that helpful?
Yes, the cash distribution has been quite helpful. So what we also did as part of the cash distribution is to encourage savings in a way. So to encourage what we call groups of cooperatives. So if you're supposed to be on the cash register for 2 years. So within that period, you're either supposed to learn a skill or join the savings program, which means you save a percentage of the cash and you're able to start up a business within the 2-year period. So you're being educated that this cash program, you're supposed to be on this for 2 years. The only people who do not have a time limit on the cash program are those who are very aged and disabled and unable to really do anything for themselves. But we like to encourage people to get off the cash program in 2 years.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Homsi, Angela Homsi, you are the co-founder and investor and director of Ignite Power. It's good to see you. Maybe you can tell us a bit about your work on the ground during the pandemic and how, how things have changed in this crazy year.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here with you today. I'm quite proud to be talking about what we're doing in Africa and beyond. And I'm an Israeli based in Dubai. So there's an angle where hopefully Israel and Dubai are collaborating as well for work in Africa and for development. So I'm happy to share our work. So we've been for the past few years, even before COVID, supplying solutions to what we believe were some of the most pressing and vital needs of our times. I mean, energy, clean access to electricity, water, agricultural solutions for food, for better food, better yield, and remote medical care and diagnostics. And we've been doing that in a part of the world that has one of the biggest unmet population that have been left out of the modern system until today, which is the rural and semi-urban Africa. And what we've believed for a while is that the best solutions to these problems, to be able to address those really vital problem in a very scalable way, is to embrace decentralized and distributed systems and technologies. So we're serving those remote population through smart usage of disruptive technologies, a lot of them Israeli, coming out of Israel, strong precision operations, strong customer focus, and working really in very close partnerships with government, with multilateral institutions such as the World Banks and other, and really believe in a business models where we have the ability to go very deep to the last mile, with affordable and deeply affordable solution, thanks to the scale that we're bringing as being a last mile operators of and financier of those technology. So we went down of providing staff access to electricity to remote population across Africa to as low as $1 a month that had to be provided to get access to those technology to the poorest part of the population. And we really believe that that's the only way that you can really democratize access to vital goods, is by leveraging technology and very deep last mile precision operations. So that's what Ignite does.
In what countries and areas?
So the areas are access to electricity through solar power and through hybrid. We're doing as well remote and medical care diagnostics, and that's using AI-based solutions for devices and for all the way from ultrasound to X-rays to readings that are usually hospital-grade reading, and a whole range of solutions that are really bringing the hospital out of the hospital to the homes in deep rural areas.
I was wondering, what countries do you work?
Sure. So we started initially in Rwanda, which we know have had a close relationship as well with Israel. So we started in Rwanda 7 years ago now. Since then, we've proven a very strong track record there, being all across the country, serving population in partnership with the government, and we're expanding across really East Africa, Central Southern Africa, Mozambique is another big country of operation, and West Africa as well. And today our teams has as well a very strong presence in the Middle East, so expanding to Africa and the Middle East, where there's as well a very deep needs for those solutions.
Okay. I will now ask the same question for the three of you, but I will start from you, Mrs. Homsi. The question is, what is your expectation beyond, beyond that year? So we are maybe getting into the phase where we're going to have, 3 to 6 months a vaccination, maybe also in Africa. And what is your expectation with respect to how do you thrive the economy, put it back on track? You can start, and then I'll ask Mrs. Newton the same question, and then Mrs. Abadayo the same question. What is your expectation for 2021 and beyond?
Sure, that's a great question, because what we believe during COVID is, we're a technology company. So what COVID has done is really to accelerate the awareness of everybody, all the players, on the importance of deploying those technology at scale on the field, on the ground for those population. And I think what COVID has done is a great accelerator. Unfortunately, a lot of people suffered from the conditions, but at least I think that having had that focus on that, everybody understood that it's not a luxury to have those technologies in your home. When you have to stay at home, or when you have, it's not a luxury to have access to electricity, to internet, to information, to education, to healthcare. So hopefully that will eventually have a ripple effect, a silver lining for 2021 that a lot of this population will have been taken into the system sustainably thanks to the deployment of those technologies. So I hope that 2020 has been a very difficult year for everybody, but that will help provide a much stronger foundation for the future from then on in the new normal that we will evolve in.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Newton? With the UN World Food Program, what is your expectation for 2021 and beyond that? How do you see, what are your needs in order to, bring a better service, I suppose, or help more people?
I think this point is very optimistic from Angela. She was talking about how this has made it really clear that we have to kind of roll out technology across the world more equitably and so on. I think that from our perspective, the key worry we have is that we haven't really felt the socioeconomic impact yet. I mean, we're feeling it. We're seeing a larger caseload of people in need. We've got many governments asking us to increase the number of people that we're helping them to assist. Problem is we don't have the resources for it, and we don't think the resources are going to be easily coming forward because most of the governments who are our key donors are also experiencing their own pinch. And so this is the real issue that we're grappling with for next year. So, I mean, looking at the positive side of that, what do we need to do better? And it's the kind of things we always focus on. And I think, better use of technology is certainly one of them. We're trying to minimize duplication of people we assist by using more biotechnology and iris scanning and using blockchain and doing all those types of innovations where we have access to them. But we're going to be making some very tough choices next year. And I think I've mentioned already, but one of the things that we're trying to do in partnership with others is to help, obviously, to roll out the vaccine and to help the pandemic to be managed globally as quickly as possible. But yeah, I think our real concern at the moment is that numbers of those at the very bottom of each society where we're helping is just the number's going to increase over.
Mr. Abdaya, it's interesting to me that the three of you, when we are talking about, you are the innovation advisor here, but your two colleagues talked about next year as, what they need is technological solutions. So maybe you can give us heads up, how do we proceed in economic dire times with, technological solutions?
Thank you very much, and I agree totally with them. I think 2020 has moved us forward in the digital space, and things that we thought were going to happen in 10 years are now happening very quickly. And for us in Nigeria, we recognize that, which is why, as part of our economic sustainability plan, one of the key things we want to do is digital identity. We want to be able to identify every Nigerian so that we're going to be able to reach everybody digitally. Also, we're looking at a lot of investments within the digital space, and the Israeli embassy in Nigeria is actually being very helpful. There's an innovation center which was opened last week, which was funded and totally driven by the Israeli embassy, and they flew in experts from Israel who are supporting Nigerian innovators to build new products and come up with solutions that can solve various challenges within the country. So I think 2021 will be a year that we will have to dig deeper into our investments in technology and into our interest in technology to ensure that we're able to meet up with the new global normal, what I'll call the global normal. Thank you.
So when you talk about technology, this is quite wide. Are you talking about financial technology or medical technology? What are you looking for?
I think it has to be all. I think it has to be all around. So what we are trying to encourage. We're trying to encourage people to build solutions across sectors, but use technology as an enabler. So if you're building a medical solution, how can technology enable you? If you're building a solution on traffic, to reduce traffic, how does technology enable you? So using technology as an enabler across sectors. Nigeria, for example, is known worldwide for its innovation in fintech. So we have big Nigerian organizations. We have Visa recently investing about $200 million in a Nigerian technology startup. So we have a lot of these stories already. And how can we extend beyond the fintech space and look into agriculture? How can we use technology to support the agriculture space? How can we use technology to improve our social investment programs? How can we use technology to improve our investments in real estate? And how can we generally use technology to build the economy across every sector?
Right, maybe a last remark from Mrs. Homsi. Again, when we're talking about international cooperation, do you have any other remark or comment with respect to what is needed in order to have your service being better served to the rural areas and maybe to the poor?
Look, when we started Ignite, we realized quickly that we cannot do any of it without a very, very strong collaborative business model. And we always said that when we were starting, we were sitting on the shoulder of giants. And now we do that across countries, I'm not just talking about donors with corporates, with local financial system and with international investors, but I'm talking as well across borders. So we have teams in Israel, teams in Dubai, in the UAE. We have teams as well located all over the countries in Africa, obviously, where we operate. And all these governments and countries and teams are collaborating together to brainstorm on how are the best technologies and how to integrate them. To your question about which technology, they need to be integrated in a platform for smooth delivery in order to enable scale and affordability. Because without having scale and affordability, you don't solve the problem. Technology stay in a lab or serve like 1 or 2 villages, that doesn't solve the problem. It's only by deep integration between the fintech part of it together with the data analytics that you need for the operations and for the logistic of your teams, together with the AI and machine learning that you need for the agricultural systems or for the medical system that you can actually deliver the solution. So basically, without deep collaboration, it doesn't happen.
All right. So Mrs. Newton from the UN World Food Program, Mr. Abdayo from the Federal Republic of Nigeria, advisor on innovation, and Mrs. Angela Homsi, co-founder of Ignite Power. I thank very much the three of you for all the work that you do and all the goodness that you try to distribute around the world. It's highly appreciated, and lots of success in your future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're back, and we are almost in our last panel. And I'd like to thank all of the previous panelists and now turn to the focus on Israel. Let me start by saying that Mr. Ohad Cohen from the Prime Minister's Office and Mrs. Shira Greenberg from the Finance Ministry couldn't join us today. So instead, we brought great panelists. We have Mr. Rowan Eifer, Economic Advisor at the Prime Minister's Office. And we have Mr. Eyal Medan, Director of Multilateral Development Banks Division in the Ministry of Finance. And with me at the table, I have Asaf Barnea, CEO of Sanera Ventures, and Mr. Ariel Delumi, Chairman, SID Israel, and Co-Executive Director of Ajik Nisped. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And I will actually start with the Prime Minister's office, Mr. Ron Eifer. Would you kindly tell us a bit about the efforts that are being taken here in Israel during the pandemic, and how do we see the international cooperation and development from your point of view?
Okay, so thank you. We at the Prime Minister's office are coordinating a governmental committee that is aiming to increase the involvement of Israel and the government of Israel in the sphere of international development. So we just launched an intermediate report that lays out all the strategy that the government of Israel have come with. And I urge all the people who are listening to us right now to read the report, or at least the executive summary of the report, and give us comments. We are very eager to receive your comments about the strategy that we just shaped. Coming back to your question about the pandemic, the strategy, we worked on the strategy for almost 2 years now. So we started working on the strategy before the pandemic. But I think the strategy is very relevant for the pandemic and for the consequences it has on the international development and the developing world. And I want to focus maybe on 2 issues. The first issue is that we, as the government of Israel, decided what are the topics that we are going to prioritize when we work in international development. That this is the prioritization of the government of Israel as a whole. And 2 topics that are part of the prioritization is first health, mainly in the sphere of digital health, that the connection to the pandemic is clear. And second is emergency response. We believe that we have a lot of experience in emergency response, both practical experience and also in technological aspects. And we would like to share this knowledge with the developing world and collaborate with it regarding those issues. The second issue is financing. Israel is probably, is not let's put it gently, it's not the country in the highest rank among the OECD countries in terms of donating ODA, overseas development assistance, to developing countries. We're actually at the top bottom of the OECD countries. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic and the budgetary constraints that the pandemic will bring with it, I don't see how the government of Israel is going to change it dramatically. However, I do think that there is a big opportunity here to increase our involvement in blended finance and financing the private sector to go and work at the developing countries. And I think the pandemic gave us a great reasoning for that as well. Because if the UN measured the SDG gaps between $3.3 to $4.5 trillion a year, I think the SDGs gap now after the pandemic will increase, but the participation of ODA there will be smaller. So those 2 vectors make a bigger gap for involvement in terms of blended finance and private sector.
But would you agree that Israel is, as you said, very good on emergency response, and here comes a global crisis which requires something different than immediate and fast and maybe harsh response. It requires more resources on planning and strategy and maybe even long-term advisory. And Israel, maybe on that front, it's not at its best, I suppose, with this, but the pandemic actually needed us to be more focused on long-term planning, and it's not as good as it could be.
I don't agree with you completely. I will give you an example. Developing countries are seeking from Israel not only technologies, but also regulatory know-how and understand how to manage systems in the long term. I agree with you that there are things that we are less good at, but there are things that are really, really relevant to the pandemic that Israel is good at, and we can increase our involvement and the advice we give other countries. For example, many developing countries are asking for advice from Israel about the regulation of Israel in different spheres of health. So for example, regulation of drugs, regulation of private, public health, and the relationship between the two of them, and so on. Water as well, water management. I think long-term, Israel can also talk long-term and give advice on how to do long-term policies and regulation.
Okay. Mr. Eyal Meidan, are you here with me? Thank
Yes.
you. It's good to see you. You are the Director of Multilateral Development Banks Division in the Ministry of Finance, so maybe you can shed a light about your, from your part of the deal, how does, the international cooperation and development works.
Of course, and thank you for having me. I just want to refer to the last sentence that Ron has mentioned, and to mention a collaboration that is now taking part between the Healthcare IL, which is under the Ministry of Health, and they sell knowledge to Inter-American Development Bank. They are now in the signing process. So just referring to what Ron has said, we do have a lot of things as a government to contribute to the developing countries. But I want to refer from my job or responsibilities to mainly to promote Israeli technologies and innovation in order to support the developing countries and also to boost Israeli trade. And the people here were talking about all the challenges that the developing world and all the world is now facing. But I think that alongside with those great challenges, there are great opportunities for the private sector, and even more, I would say, the gap could not be filled by only governmental and international aid. It has to be also private money that come into the developing countries and support them. So I would like to say in a few sentences why I think that Israeli companies should be more engaged with developing banks, with the developing countries, and specifically working with the development banks, because I think that there is a win-win situation here and it is not exploited enough. So in just a few sentences, the potential is huge. Just in 2019, nearly $100 billion were invested in the banks that Israel are part of. And the Israeli companies that already realized the potential that those banks has awarded $250 million out of those this amount of money that is investing. We think that more that the Israeli expertise in the cyber, water, agriculture, health, energy, those expertise are very, very relevant to the developing countries, and we think that more Israeli companies should take part and be engaged with the banks project, and I can give a few examples later on.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Asaf Barnea, you are on the other hand of the assistant with your Sanara Ventures. You are nurturing companies that are dealing with medical innovation, right? And did you find yourself in this year, bringing assistance to the world and helping, or how was it? How do you describe 2020?
Well, obviously the pandemic is a game-changing event. I mean, basically, even if we're looking into the United States, whatever was done with going to see your physician, going to the hospital, now there's the new normal, as we've been saying, and the new normal is digital first. So for instance, the transition that we've been seeing now towards telemedicine, including companies that we have within Sanara Ventures, companies such as My Home Doc, which is a telemedicine device for remote diagnostic. We shall see more and more of those, let it be out of Israel or regardless, coming in and basically provides the ability through technologies, not just to dive into a new concept of delivering care and the access of care definitely in growth markets, but also in countries whereby the practices were there in stagnation, with bureaucracy and conservativeness, and basically there has to be a change. If we look into the expenses, just within the US, for that matter, would have been 18 to 19% of the GDP of the US attributed to medical expenses. In Israel, it's about 7 to 8%. But this is not acceptable, and definitely in growth markets where we need to come up with new technologies to deliver care in a different way, in a very fundamental way.
Do you see the innovation in this year, or do you, I mean, it was such a shock for everybody, and it needed a lot of, thoughts of how to proceed, but did you see some new ideas? Did you see the human spirit coming up with, great ideas?
Very much so, very much so. First of all, also on behalf of the Export Institute, I'm acting as the chairman of the Life Science Board in the Export Institute. So overall, we've been seeing and we've been sending like a digital catalog with about 70 related solutions to COVID-19, direct and indirect solution out of Israel, generally speaking.
Such as?
Different things for remote monitoring, basically for potentially diagnostic at-home, personalized medicine, wellness and prevention before. So some of which were directly related to COVID-19, but some of which were related to respiratory and other things, which obviously the demand has been increased by the pandemic. But as been said always, a crisis is an opportunity, and this is what we've been seeing. A tremendous change also from high-tech personnel in Israel. It came up and all of a sudden brought some new technologies for mitigating the pandemic or other infection diseases within hospitals. So various systems to control that and be able to support it, let it be with employers in hospitals. So various solutions, not all of which will be sustainable, not all of which will be deployed, obviously, but the amounts of innovation that we've been seeing in Israel and across the board obviously pushes very much so digital health out of Israel and also in other markets.
All right, Mr. Ariel de Lumif, speaking from the point of view of international cooperation, and how do you see the world from here proceeding with maybe putting a little bit more emphasis on private sector like that, or on getting the money out of the government to direct it to the right places?
So Shalom Tal, it's great being here. I think that we as civil society organizations, NGOs, we are facing global challenges as well as local challenges. And the fact that international traveling was almost stopped at some points, the fact that we are facing a global recession, and the fact that funding for international development was diverted from traditional support, for example, in TB, HIV, malaria, and now is moved to coronavirus, is now creating new challenges for international development. And indeed, we already have first indicators that TB, malaria, HIV are now in the increased side. Civil society organizations have several advantages over big aid agencies and government agencies. We are more flexible. We can work in places where official Israel sometimes cannot work, and then open the bridge for official Israel agencies to come over. And we also have better understanding and better connections to the communities. Now, despite all the challenges that we are facing these days, I believe that we also have a very big opportunity. In my perspective, this is a disruptive moment for international development.
You're using the high-tech term of disruption, which always afterwards comes a new product.
Yes, and I will say why, because for many years we preached for values such as working with communities, working bottom up, working with local organizations. And the truth of the matter is that we have not always been very loyal to these principles and values. And I think that today we have an opportunity to decentralize international development. And my suggestion for Israeli NGOs is to help local NGOs be more adaptive to the current situation, be more transparent. I think that they should be more accountable, help them to be more accountable. And maybe more important, start and speak the international language, the language of international development agencies, because in many cases, local NGOs do not speak the language and they cannot pass the bureaucracy, they cannot pass the red tape that many international agencies have, and they cannot connect to the money that you mentioned before.
Right.
But also to other resources.
So talking about the money, I will go back right now to Mr. Reifer and Mr. Medan, both of you the same question, I suppose. So we are in an era where it's not only the pandemic, but also no budget and no money and no allocations. And it's definitely it's not your it's not your fault and it's not your maybe your decision, but it puts stress and challenge that we did not expect here in Israel. How can a country help its own citizens, or maybe, you know, help other citizens of the global community with such a restrictions on the budget? Ron, we'll go first. Mr. Reifer?
Sure. I think you are touching a delicate point. And as I said in my what I said earlier, we have a budget problem. And this is why I think the solutions that we are looking to find are solutions that use money or governmental money and leverage it through either private sector money or international organizations' money, and basically creating a bigger impact with the limited budgets that we have. I think this is generally speaking about an answer to what you are saying. And I think this is also what the international community or the international development community is looking at when they see development in the next decade. The OECD that is advising us on this process is putting the issue of private sector engagement and blended finance as the hottest topics for the next decade of development. And this gives us some comfort in terms of financing. Also, I have to say that the government of Israel is not fully on board with this concept of development, unfortunately. But when you phrase it differently and you understand, as Eyal said, that it's a win-win situation, that the working in international development doesn't mean that you are just doing it for altruistic reasons, and you're doing it only is donating money for the developing countries. When you phrase it differently, it's not only a matter of phrasing, it's actually the truth that it could bring a lot of opportunities for the Israeli private sector as well. I think money and budget could be found for that if you show the ROI for Israel as well.
So, Mr. Maidan, Eyal, taking exactly from where Ron left it, what do we get back for our interests when we work with development banks, and what do we get from that as Israelis?
Okay, yeah, so as I promised, I have an example just for that question. So if we are talking about the ROI, okay, so I do think that the main thing is that we want to contribute to the world and to aid those developing countries, but also, of course, it's a win-win situation. And one example for what the government is doing is the fund, the trust fund that we have with the IDB, Inter-American Development Bank, in the field of cyber. So we invested there $3 million in 2018, and this trust fund, which helped developing countries to learn about cyber, and we brought the representatives from their governments to Israel to learn about cyber, because we are very strong in the cyber field. Because of the connections that Israel has generated, because of this fund that we donated, $60 million of contracts were signing with the countries in Latin America. So it was a donation of $3 million and generated $60 million of signed contracts. So this is what is in it for us. Okay, this is just one example, and because of we are looking, and the government is also always looking, and the Ministry of Finance specifically, always looking for more engines for growth, okay? So this is just another example for an engine of growth that can be, that we can have.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Barnea, going back to you in your private sector, and we heard earlier from Ambassador Schlein how, with respect to personal diplomacy, it's a challenge because diplomatic world used to, an assistant and development used to go around the world, meet with people, and see their needs. Now you are a business person. You were probably traveling all around the world until March, when it's all ended at one day immediately. Can you tell us a bit about how do you, creative minds, innovation, and, reaching to people's needs in order, when you develop a concept or a medicine or a device, and you have to do it everything by Zoom. Is it, what has changed for you personally?
Obviously, it's changed, specifically if you need to push through and become a champion of a certain technology or whatever. Eventually, you have to meet people face to face, and we are all been looking forward to do so. So in terms of the process...
Did you leave the State of Israel since March?
Well, I just came back from Dubai.
Okay,
which
of course.
It was interesting to see it.
So the only place we can fly to, you went, right?
Yeah, well, we're trying to do business over there, but it's... I'd like to emphasize the moment we are able to push through innovation, medical innovation, healthcare innovation again, this has to be some kind of a different kind of collaboration. One of the things that we did with the World Bank, me as an advisor to the IFC, to the World Bank, in terms of knowledge sharing, and this is something that I'm stating repeatedly to the Ministry of Health and to other organizations, we brought in two...
do they listen?
Yeah, they do. They do. So with that, even though we are, as a venture capitalist, we invest in things which basically invent the wheel, like disruptive technologies. Nonetheless, on the international collaboration, we have to go deeper and deeper into knowledge sharing. And two examples very quickly. One of the things that we did with the World Bank is a project called TAC Emerge. We've been bringing medical innovation to India, later on to Brazil, and now to Africa with that project of the World Bank and the IFC, actually, and testing and validating new technologies in India, or let it be cervical cancer, let it be for malaria, let it be for anything else, which exists out there in Israel, in Spain, in New Zealand. But the Indian hospitals which work with the World Bank did not know about. Same goes for Brazil, same goes for Africa. This is one thing. So it's a technology transfer from an ecosystem one to another, and also knowledge sharing. The second would be actually from Norway, out of Norway, there's a company called Induct, which basically it's a knowledge sharing platform for connecting 81 hospitals. And once there's an implementation of new technology, let it be a new approach for detection of breast cancer, which is actually a real example from Oslo University Hospital, the moment they embrace a new technology, a new process, and they shorten the diagnostic time from 12 weeks to 1 week, and this is a real story, it was shared by 80 other hospitals, sponsored by the government, the Norwegian government, to increase or incentivize the hospitals to do so. So on one hand, the private sector, and we and the government as well, we invest in disruptive technologies in the medical space. On the other, as governments, as global cooperation and ecosystem, we have to step more and more into pragmatic examples of knowledge sharing, because there's no need to invent the wheel and again, but rather invest in knowledge sharing and spread existing knowledge to wider regions.
Thank you. So, Mr. Delumi, last closing comment for the day. How do you think that the world of development and humanitarian aid is going to take it from here? Give us your vision. What's going to happen next?
So, as I said before, we are in a disruptive moment for international development. I think there will be much more space now for local players, local NGOs. And in the Israeli context, I would like to say a few very quick things. First of all, innovation is not only about technology. Innovation, in my opinion, is finding solutions to unsolvable problems. And in Israel, we have gained many social assets over the years: absorption of immigration, community health programs, working with disabled people, and so on and so forth. Our aim now is try to commercialize these social assets and to increase social export in addition to commercialized commodities. The second issue, I think, is to find ways for Israeli NGOs to better work with Israeli government. Today, we are working in SID Israel on offering the government several mechanisms for Mashav and other agencies to be working with Israeli NGOs. This is by now very, very limited, but I think that there are many mechanisms such as joint ventures, grants, tenders, and so on, where the Israeli government can increase its impact by working with NGOs and with commercial companies. And I think the last point that I would like to say is about Israeli regulation. Unfortunately, Israeli regulation today is not helping Israeli NGOs in the international sector. Some of the problem we have managed to solve, such as tax exemption status for Israeli NGOs, but still a very simple example, Israeli volunteers that go abroad with T-shirts with the Israeli flag, identify themselves as Israelis, are still not insured by the Israeli social insurance. And these are regulations that can be changed and really help Israeli NGOs. And we are really, by now, in the very first days to realize the potential of Israeli NGOs in international development.
Right. Okay, let me thank Ron Eifer at the Prime Minister Office, Eyal Meidan at the Ministry of Finance, Asaf Barnea from Sanera Ventures, and Ariel Delumi from SID. And I think we are now getting to the closing of the day. I want to thank all of your listeners and people who watched the program of international development. And let me invite Mrs. Janet Pachima, a partner at Herzog Fox Nieman. This is where the office where we are located. She will give us some closing remarks.
Thank you. Well, that's it. So, what's left to thank all of you?
Just a second. Hold on a second. Go ahead, Mrs. Pachima.
Thank you. That's it. And what is left but to thank all of you at home in your offices, wherever you are, for joining us for just one more online conference in 2020. At Herzog Fox Nieman, I want to thank you for coming and say it's been tons of fun to host this. We know you're here because the effects of the pandemic on development and humanitarian aid are of primary importance to you. We hope you like the format. I want to give a huge thanks to Tal Schneider. She's a diplomatic and political correspondent of Globes, and she has taught us how to stay cool when it gets really hot in a studio, I can tell you that. We hope you were touched by stories you heard. We hope you were inspired by the possibilities and the challenges that you've learned about today. Never has the world had so much in common, and never have the disparities of the world been so acute. To close, so much has been said about Hanukkah, the glory of Hanukkah, the holiday of lights, and the darkness that this year has brought so many people. So I'm particularly happy that we were able to start with candle lighting, so we could have a little extra light as we started our conference. And I hope this holiday season holds joy for each of you in its own special 2020 way. Good night.